I'm trying to find out which is the right green button first, and then guess we can start. Okay, so a couple of words about CNH. The point here is just to share that we are scattered across a pretty vast geography. So it's kind of paramount for us to understand how to move consistently people which are different by definition because of geography, culture, history, as we have a tradition of merger and acquisition, and so on and so forth. And in this context, I am responsible for Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which is the big countries are about 15, and it's a strange animal because you have Central Europe, but you also have South Africa, Turkey, or United Arab Emirates in the middle in the same sentence, and following the same processes that, in theory, should make sense for all of them. Now, I try to look at this as kind of my little risico. So first thing that I was wondering is, okay, how do I manage in a consistent way how this has been done in the past? And looking back, we can have some funny examples. British Royal Navy, we are speaking of 18th century, so it's mainly pirates and the boats chasing them, and they still had a pretty formal and structured systems to motivate sailors to capture those ships. And that was hierarchical, similarly to any organization. And the spoils were distributed according to a pretty strict formula with a mix of tangible rewards and intangible rewards. As you can see, there were a kind of a prize money system together with this kind of room or extended stays on shore, or similar perks that could build their total reward system. In the end, the purpose was similar to the one we have today. So how do we create a culture of meritocracy, ambition, within a central framework in a kind of a vast organization? Shifting a bit forward, we see similar challenges when we take a look at how the United Nations shape their programs. So there is plenty of documents online, you can easily Google that stuff. And the point here is how do they shape? Again, and similar to what Aiken was sharing a moment ago, we have the perception of a clear need for global framework, but still giving some flexibility at a local level to adapt to cultural differences. As we typically, inside HR, we spend half of the time speaking about diversity, but then how this gets declined and balanced between the need for a central governance and deploying kind of the same message consistently across the organization, and the way this is perceived, which may bring differences and flavors. So now, sharing a bit more how this is deployed inside the CNH. We tend to have the standard components when it comes to total rewards. So you can see on the left the base salary, the short-term incentives, benefits, long-term incentives. And then a portion of this stuff is managed globally, a portion of this stuff is managed locally. Now, it typically, now you start from the why. Why a portion of that is managed globally? Because the priorities, the strategy, the core message that we want to convey to the employees is common across all the company. So this is going to tailor those different total rewards components so that they bring the same message. But then, when it comes to adaptation to the local markets, to the local culture, to the employee experience, this is kind of delegated a bit. So this is where we leave the locals, speaking the country HR, the local HR, or the local total rewards team, some degree of flexibility to customize all this stuff. And then when we start from the base salary, I will use this as an example without reading everything, but I mean, the grading system must allow you to compare roles across different geographies, so this is global by definition. At the same time, when you are going to take a look at the market benchmark, it really depends on where do you have your people in the country, who is your competitor, eventually in some cases, not exactly in segment terms, but in that geography. Because you may be competing with companies which belong to another industry but are seeking the same professionals you are trying to source in that geography. So that's kind of local by definition. And also the career pathing is very different. If we look towards more the Asia-Pacific side, you have a lot of steps and more frequent career advancement because this becomes kind of cyclical and with a shorter frequency. If you move Central Europe, this is different. You tend to move less frequently, but with more meaningful increases. So this also has an impact when we are speaking of base salary definitions. Bonus and incentives, we have just seen that, and I would underline the same. I mean, the eligibility, the core message of who is eligible, why, which are the rules, this is typically global. But then, when we are looking at the pay mix, this is significantly different depending on the market. There are, again, culturally or historically differences where you may want to push more towards the variable compensation and less towards the fixed one, and vice versa. Benefits are kind of a Pandora's vase every time that you look at that, because they are kind of local by definition, but at the same time there are some elements that you may want to exclude from the local creativity. Going for real-life examples, what we have discussed in CNH is life, travel insurances, all the part that is covering and protecting the employee. This is global. You have zero flexibility on that. It gets negotiated and deployed with the same rules, coverages, etc., etc. Then, all the well-being portion that can be more open to flexibility, being this the physical well-being or the financial well-being or the mental well-being, those are typically managed at local level. Plus, a lot of benefits, I mean, we are kind of interested in understanding where we can get some degree of tax efficiency. So they get financially more affordable and sustainable over time. And this is local by definition. So you may not have exactly the same portfolio everywhere because the context you are trying to deploy this stuff in is different depending on the country. And then, opposite side of the spectrum, you have long-term incentives. This is typically, in terms of target audience, oriented towards a global portion of your organization. So those are the directors, MVP, who not only are often moving across different geographies, but they typically know each other, so they compare each other. So it makes sense that you use exactly the same message, core content, targets, etc., across the full organization for that. And this is global by definition. What stays on the local side in this aspect is everything that is individually linked or related to the tax implications, which are local by definition. But may also impact the design, because when I was thinking about the tax implication, was also thinking about the net issuing or sell to cover mechanism that may differ depending on the geography you are looking at. Now, when we were kind of brainstorming with the organizers and preparing this speech, part of my role is also to take a look at the underlying data and prepare for the analysis that are performed in the organization. So when HR debates about we want to empower managers and we want to have data-driven decision makers. It then falls onto my desk to understand how do we make this happen. And the first point is to define, okay, which components of pay decisions we can bring onto the manager's responsibility. And this is typically what is related to base pay decisions, bonus, promotions, and of course the direct interaction with the employee. Now, it does not mean that we leave them alone in this. We typically give some ranges of suggested movement depending on their direct reports analysis, which is the competitiveness compared versus the specific market they are in. We were discussing a moment ago how important it is to consider performance assessment for pay decisions or not. We suffer from kind of the same degree of oscillation across multiple years of performance assessment. So we are still finding the right balance between the performance trend and the pay decisions. But then also considering the different perspective in terms of level of detail that we are going to give as an information. Again, to make a real-life example, what are we sharing at the moment with managers is an approximation of your competitiveness or the competitiveness of their direct reports. So we are going to give the positioning range and simply tell you this person is within an acceptable range, or it is below, or it is above, and that's it. Then HR, who has the role in terms of HR manager, like adult supervision, to make sure everybody is playing according to the proper rules, they get visibility on the full comparison. So it's much more granular level of detail, etc., etc. And this is the same that we are using in terms of grading. We kind of use the same trick. We have some big clusters that we communicate to employees, and that defines their grading, and it's just kind of a compass to let them know where they are in the career pathing. But when it comes to the internal processes, we have a much more granular grading system, which is kind of very much like Mercer IPE system, if you recall that methodology. Okay, now, which are the pragmatical steps to make this experience work? Because in the end, what we are offering, kind of the keyword that we discuss when we bring proposals, is the employee value proposition, the employee experience, and all that stuff. Okay, so we start from expectations. People, managers, but also employees are typically used by now to interact with any tool expecting the same customer experience at Amazon.com or something like that. So when we tend to tailor the HR tools for them, we need to keep that in mind. It means that they are expecting to receive suggestions and kind of easy to use guidelines on how to leverage their pay decisions and move consistently across geographies, because our managers experience the same challenge that we experience as HR. They have people scattered in different countries. They are not necessarily familiar with all the countries they have people within. So we need to kind of support them with this stuff. And the first portion is the customization of the proposals. So depending on geography, level, context, we tend to display a different starting point. The second one is education, because we cannot blame managers for not taking the pay decision that we would love if we don't explain towards them what's the expectation. The third layer is automation and tools. This is probably one of the most challenging, as all the data that now we had in the other room, lots of colleagues that will tell you wonderful things about what can be done with proper tools. The challenge is always to prepare and build the foundations for that. I mean, the analysis typically is almost easier than getting all the data in the same bucket, in the same format, something that is readable, that does not necessarily have data quality issues, etc., etc. This traditionally required a lot of brute force effort when it came to clean up the data. In previous years, the typical approach was before you launch any HR process, you take 4 or 5 trainees, you close them in a room, and they are not allowed to leave until the data are clean. Which I mean, it works, but still artificial intelligence is now bringing some more smarter approach to that. And part of that is not even artificial intelligence, because when we are speaking about month-over-month comparison and finding if you have big outliers that you should double-check, this is simple robotization. It's slightly more than a macro, so it's definitely feasible. Or checking all the data points that you are going to use in the process and are currently blank in the system. Again, this stuff is pretty easy. It can be automated and relieve a bit the starting of the HR processes. This is also a way to be mindful of your HR colleagues. I mean, data quality checks is usually not the most desirable of the activities. And then there is governance, because having solid data also means that you can easily check if everything is moving according to your expectations, and correct in time, because it means kind of a real-time visibility on what's going on. Now, those processes typically are now pretty compressed in a period of time. So you open your merit process, and we are going to step there in a second, and you typically give a couple of weeks to your managers to take those decisions. In those couple of weeks, they are maybe traveling, attending executive meetings, etc., etc. So those couple of weeks becomes a couple of hours most of the times, and being able to try and understand, have a set of triggers that can tell you if something is going in a wrong direction. This works only if there is automation behind, because else geographic and design complexities become too much to manage without automation. Now, I was commenting about the annual merit program. Again, the split between global and local focus is similar to the one we reviewed for the wider total rewards experience. When it comes to the core points you wanna push, so if it's meritocracy, or if it's just market competitiveness, or if it's a replacement for a collective agreement that for any reason you didn't close in the geography, this gets defined globally. Then locally you have all the fine-tuning. How does this work? In terms of budgeting, this is the typical process where you put on paper a proposal by region, you validate with the chief financial officer, and at some point you get a budget. Locally, you will then have to split and cut all this budget to the stakeholders that you have in a specific geography. Then you step into the design phase. When you are designing this stuff, you consider the factors that may be of interest when shaping a pay proposal. So the individual performance, but also now the competitiveness versus market and pay ranges, but also which other increases have affected the individual along the year, so that you get the full perspective, or which others are planned to occur later in the year. Then, once you have this stuff, you are ready to put in the manager's lap a set of suggestions and let them add their qualitative input, because we just kind of closed the quantitative portion of the analysis. We have a fair idea of what a robot would suggest, but then we are speaking of people, so we need to give some degree of flexibility to managers to get their input. And when everything resembles a solid proposal, you close the loop with communication, and this is again shaped with the core message, or I mean, one paragraph or two, which are shaped globally, and then the rest, which is locally customized, and even better if in local language or with some personal touch. Instead of dear colleague, the name of the person, for example. Again, technology helps in this stuff. Now, before closing, again, some examples, how do you manage all these data points? Because in the end, the typical company starts to have an ecosystem of different tools, which are partially purchased from external providers, partially homebrew internally because of an urgent need, etc., etc., but they all exchange data among each other. And the challenge with data quality is that the more we have interconnected systems, the more the error propagates. So it becomes increasingly important to address with automation or dashboards or whatever system you decide to tackle the data quality point. Then, when it comes to this discussion of HR data points, one of the elephants in the room is typically everybody agrees that we should leverage more technology, but typically HR is a bit resistant about educating himself or themselves on this, and nobody really wants to take the journey. This is a collective journey without much choices. So I mean, I expect that each and any HR professional will have to invest some time getting up to speed on tech evolutions in the next couple of years. Not like we have a choice. Then the fragmentation of the system, another point that I wanted to touch is can be tackled from different perspectives. One can be to continue the interconnection, the interfacing of those tools until you are able to bring everything together. The other one is take an external data lake, simply throw everything inside, and then you can start extracting from the data lake. This is what we are doing at the moment, as it seemed like an easier approach to put together data which are from different systems, but also logically from different sources. Because we are speaking about the compensation data, but then we want to mix with talent, but then we want to mix with the organizational data, but then we typically take a look at a couple of personal data points, such as seniority into group, or the age bracket, or the number of family components, and things like that that we use to segment the data, because then ultimately, when we're looking at what is working and what is not, it's very similar to a persona analysis. So we tend to profile our employees by groups and then see what is working for each group and why. And just trying to close this kind of overview, we have seen the importance of starting from what can be considered success, what do we want to achieve. And this is typically not always the same if you ask the company or if you ask the employees. So it's kind of important to at least put on paper the two perspectives so that you can take an informed decision and define the direction where we want to move. check the local market practices, etc. Here, maybe the only word worth commenting is that competitors may not necessarily be the same segment, the same industry, the same size, but it really comes to the point of talent sourcing. The harmonization and building the local actions map is important in terms of governance, because then the flexibility which is given to the local teams is very nice to build engagement with local people, but can easily become a creative paradise where we lose control of the initiatives that are being moved forward, and they start to diverge from the company goals. And then execution, maintenance, and governance. When it comes to governance, I think that the others we have commented. When it comes to governance, again, it's interesting to consolidate all the data points coming from different processes, and then we typically have all workflows managed manually. So at some point there is a report consolidated by somebody, which goes via email to one of the bosses that reviews, etc., etc. Now, there are a lot of workflow management systems emerging that can easily replace this workflow of emails and have the advantage that everything gets stored. So if in 3 years from now somebody asks what was happening during merit cycle 2022 or something similar, you can track how and why some decisions were made, which is another activity that typically absorbs time from the total rewards team. No? Explain decisions taken geological ages ago. And with that, I would say that I have tried to give you a flavor of what we are doing in the company. Hope that was interesting. And I would go quiet for a second and go for the questions. Thanks.